we'll get started. I think for most of you, David won't need too much introduction. Most notably, he was co-founder and let's say chief architect of the massive meteoric success of Just Eat, who appeared to be going from strength to strength under this lockdown, and now is plying his trade as according to one news article I read, the most powerful man in Welsh rugby. But I think there's 15 men.
I think that's Alan Wynne-Jones the last time.
Yeah, I was literally about to say Alan Wynne-Jones is there. And so, yeah, speaking to you today is particularly momentous, David, as we were just chatting. 2 years ago today, Wales played Ireland and won the Grand Slam. And it's also even more momentous because today is the day I get a haircut. So, which obviously we were very pleased
And we virtually nilled Ireland as well. They didn't score 80 minutes. Just make it that point.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, if everyone can just go to your view thing and stick speaker view on so that you get a better view of David. Otherwise, we'll just be small little boxes on your screen. So, David, maybe we can start at the beginning, perhaps, of, I suppose, your journey with Just Eat, but you were previously at Coca-Cola. So can you just tell me about how you transitioned from Coca-Cola in, to Just Eat, who'd started a handful of years before in Denmark, but basically moved to London, and that's where you got involved. Can you just tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I guess it's a story of sort of friendship, really. So how it came about is the leading founder of Just Eat is a Danish guy called Jesper Buch, who's a really good friend to this day, and he'd started up Just Eat in a town called Vejle in Denmark, which is a small town in Jutland of about 50,000 inhabitants, and was building a business, if you can call it that at the time, out of a farm. One of my colleagues at Coca-Cola Denmark, which is actually owned by Carlsberg, at the time I was running the UK and Ireland restaurant business for Coca-Cola, and rang me up and said, look, I've got this, I can't remember the exact, I think he said crazy, and sort of translated Danish in a way. I think he meant colourful rather than crazy, but crazy entrepreneur who's building this website, because of course there was no apps back in 2005, who's building this website called Just Eat in takeaway restaurants in Denmark. It's really early, but he wants to come to the UK and learn a bit more about the UK takeaway restaurant market. And this was in the summer of 2005, and I said to him, he was a good colleague of mine, obviously an opposite number, but in Scandinavia at Coca-Cola, and I thought I'll just help him out. I said, yeah, of course I can take him for lunch and give him a quick whistle-stop tour of the UK restaurant landscape over lunch. So I met him in Hammersmith, which is where our head office was, and went to Nando's in Hammersmith, and we just hit it off. So I remember having lunch with Jesper. We became friends quite quickly. I shared with him what I knew. I could see he was very, very entrepreneurial. We were a similar age, so we were sort of late 20s at the time. And at the end of the lunch, I'll never forget, he said, well, why don't we start Just Eat together in the UK? Why don't we do it together? And it was like, so this guy's crazy, but I'm sort of enjoying my time at Coke, and I'd been there from the time I was a graduate. So I'd spent 8 years at Coke, really enjoyed it. I said, listen, mate, that's very kind of you, but not for me. I've just got married. I'm not looking to move. But, if I can be of any help to you, if I can make some introductions, if I can introduce you to the UK restaurant businesses, then of course I'd be more than happy to do that, because I did like him. He was a very affable guy. So I didn't think anything more of it. And then he rang me about a fortnight later and said, look, I come back to the UK. Do you fancy going for a beer? So we went for a beer in Hammersmith after work, and one beer turned to 2 beers, turned to 3 beers. And then, like all great ideas, they often start in a pub. And then by the end of the evening, we'd sort of made these plans to start Just Eat together. And I remember going home thinking, what the hell have I done here? And then by the Christmas, I'd resigned. I had a great boss at Coke, fantastic boss, Will Usher, who said to me, look, David, why don't you give it a go? If the worst comes to the worst, you can always come back. So if you go back to 2005, the economy was good. So it wasn't really a brave decision. I didn't have kids. So my boss was fantastic and said, look, if you want to, why don't you go and do it for 6-12 months? If it doesn't work out, you've scratched an itch that you said. I'd said for a while at Coke I wanted to go and start my own business. So it's sort of, he said, look, and if it doesn't work out, there's more than likely there'll be something here. So I sort of quit in the Christmas of 2005, and we opened on St. David's Day, March 2006, for good luck. It turned out to be good luck, although there was bumps along the way. And Jesper and I opened and got going.
Brilliant. And so, what did it look like getting those? So two-sided marketplaces are infamously difficult to build, because you've basically got two sets of customers you're trying to deal with, the restaurants and the sort of the end consumer. What did that look like in the early days, like in trying to get those restaurants on board? How were you able to do that? And actually, where did you focus? Did you decide to focus first on the restaurants or first on the customers? And how did you do that? Because I'm assuming you had no money and no resources.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So there was a clear chicken and egg here. The chicken and egg in this marketplace is restaurants first, customers second. You need the supply to stimulate demand. So, I was very clear about that. I kind of, obviously, from spending 8 years at Coke and 2 years running the restaurant business in the UK, I think I had a pretty good sense of which way round that was, and not least the fact that I could see it was very fragmented in the UK. So while we do have chains, restaurant brands, if you think about the UK market, it's not like the US, where there's huge restaurant brands which can build websites on their own. The majority of the UK business is independent, family-owned, entrepreneurial businesses, so very fragmented, which is perfect for a marketplace type business model. So we definitely started with supply, which we felt in turn would stimulate demand. But look, it's easy to forget that 16 years ago, when we started Just Eat, there was no website for restaurants, and certainly no restaurant website for takeaway restaurants. And I can tell you, the first few restaurants we went into, we were thrown out of. So I was doing all the supply side acquisition. Jesper was running the website. So our roles were divided in that sense. Although, as you can imagine, in an early stage startup with two people in a basement, in reality, we were doing everything. But yeah, the first restaurants threw us out. Said, look, this won't work for a local takeaway. This might work for a Domino's, or it might work for a Papa John's, but it's not going to work for a local mom and pop takeaway outlet. So the first year or two was really tricky. We had to build a case by case, sort of postcode by postcode data sales testimonial that said it made sense for you as a local takeaway restaurant owner to come onto the product. And then, as long as you were patient and treated the customers well, slowly the orders would grow. So it's very easy to forget in 2021 that, it's a kind of no-brainer for a restaurant owner to be on a digital channel. But back in 2005, there was a lot of inertia. So the first 18 months, 2 years in particular, were tricky. And then as we internationalized the business, it was really used to make me smile, because we built a business, first of all, out of East London. Canary Wharf was where we started Just Eat. So it was quite funny, because as we moved into different postcodes, for example, what I'd hear is, it'll work in London, but it won't work in Birmingham and Manchester. And then when we did London, Birmingham, Manchester, I can remember a guy in Newcastle in Gateshead saying to me, he owned a place called Antep Pizza in Gateshead, and he said to me, it might work, and honestly he said this, it might work in London, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool, but it won't work in Newcastle. and it sort of made me smile, because it was like, okay, I started to get a lot of conviction, because I've seen the movie a few times. But then jump forward 2 or 3 years, we just launched Just Eat Canada, and I swear to you, I was in Toronto, and a restaurant said to me, it might work in the UK, France, Spain, Italy, but it will work in Canada. So it was, as we globalized the business, the same sort of level of, albeit at a different scale. And it just takes you back to first principles when you're building a business, which is they have a compelling vision of the product, but have the data to support the proposition. So what we used to do is build very local sales testimonials, very local, hyper local. So literally, when that guy said that in Toronto, or when that guy said that in Gateshead, we could go, well, you're saying that, but actually here's some sales information from a place in Durham. Here's some sales information from a place. And of course, once we've been in a city for a month or two, here's some sales information, from a guy who's literally a kilometer down the road. So all of a sudden, our hyper-local sales information is how we use that. And we never sort of ever let go of that. We sort of use that to, whether we're in Sao Paulo or Stockport, we use that hyper-local sales information to sort of build the supply side. And then like all two-sided marketplaces, once you have the supply side, a bit like booking.com on hotels, once you understand that, then you actually, the demand side slowly grows and grows and grows. And the proposition to the demand side is so compelling because they can save credit card information, see reviews from customers, get a comprehensive choice of everything in their neighborhood. The demand side just grows and grows. And all of a sudden you have this flywheel of the more supply you get, the more demand you get, the more demand you get, the more compelling it becomes to suppliers. And then all of a sudden you're going round and round and round, and you have an incredibly powerful flywheel of growth as a marketplace business. And it's one of the reasons why still to this day, I love marketplace businesses, and I spend a lot of time now investing in them, because as long as you have really great management teams and a great business model that underpins it, I think they're very compelling digital businesses.
So you're saying that really for you, the supply side acquisition was the painful and expensive bit?
For sure.
Okay, yeah. So what? Sure. How was that? Just simply a case of shoe leather on your part, just like wind David up and send him out and to do his job, or were there other tactics you employed to, because obviously once you start to grow, you can't just go, right, we're just going to do E9 in East London, right? So that's fine when you're just doing a discrete postcode, but when you start to make those decisions about expansion, we're going to target a slightly different demographic, slightly different postcode. What tactics were you employing then? Because obviously, you have a finite capacity as a human being, and I'm sure your team did as well.
Yeah, so we were a bootstrap business, so we didn't have significant amounts of capital. So for the first 3 years, we were bootstrapped. What did that mean? As we grew revenues, we employed one other person. So and we took 9% of any order that went from the platform to a restaurant from our platform. So you can imagine, on a takeaway order of 20 quid, we were making basically £1.80-ish. So you need a lot of takeaway orders to employ people. So the first 3 months, it was basically me. And then after 3 months, our revenues were something like 750 quid a month net revenue. So Jesper and I were obviously not making any money, but we used that to employ a further part-time supply side salesperson who worked for me. And then we slowly grew. So after 12 months, we probably had 4 or 5 people in our sales team, plus all of myself and Jesper were, I would be in the office at 7 in the morning, and then I would go on the road at 11 a.m. and I'd be on the road till probably 10, 11 at night, sort of 6 days a week. So I would go home smelling of kebabs, pizzas, curry, you can imagine, can't you? So yeah, that's how we did it. I mean, that's how we did it. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't sexy. It was hard work. And then after probably 18 months, 2 years, we had 9, 10 people in our sales team, pretty much if you imagine the old university towns of Great Britain, we kind of had one local person in each of those cities. And we just worked incredibly hard. And I think, to this day, if you think, well, what built Just Eat, we were not first mover in the market, although we did not know it at the time. There was actually a player that started in West London called Hungry House, that was on Dragon's Den, actually, about a year after we launched, and got back in on Dragon's Den. They were actually started a month before us, and a year before us, lastminute.com started their own equivalent of Just Eat called Urban Bite, which is obviously a crap name. But their execution was pretty average, and we were able to out-execute him, even though at the time, lastminute.com was sort of the darling of the UK, probably the only sort of digital business people knew at the time in 2005. And we were able to execute them just through, and it's a bit like business or sport. There is, in the end, there's no substitute for hard work. And I would say we were definitely the hardest working management team, and probably a little bit irrational in terms of the hard work that we put into the business the first 2 or 3 years. But I think that gave us the foundation from which to go and raise venture capital in 2009. And then that really did then topspin everything. Because, of course, raising venture capital, we probably raised venture capital 2 years too late, because we were first-time entrepreneurs and just didn't know what we didn't know. Like, if you'd have asked Jesper or I what a venture capital was in 2005, 2006, we wouldn't have had a clue. If you'd asked what an IPO was, we probably would have thought it was some sort of disease. So we were pretty naive in our late 20s. Neither of us came from affluent backgrounds. Neither of us came from financial backgrounds. None of us had families who'd started business. So we just didn't know. So we raised that capital a bit late, but it definitely enabled us then to properly invest and grow and expand our strategy. So it was 2000. So I sort of described the 2006 to 2009 years as sort of the dark shoe leather years, which involved an insane amount of professional hours. And then 2009, probably 2013, was the sort of really exciting scale up years where we internationalized. We had proper venture capital backing, so we had access to capital, so we could start building really great teams that were certainly better than we were. And then obviously 2014 we took the company public. So the early years were kind of in two phases. There was the bootstrap years, 2005, 2009, and then 2009, 2013 with a more sort of, I guess, glamorous period.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to come back to that point you made a few minutes ago about being a better executor is better than more important than being a first mover. But I just wanted to just briefly sort of get into what exactly did the sales process and customer acquisition or the supplier acquisition look like in terms of like, were you literally going into a restaurant with a clipboard and selling the proposition, and how has that changed? I know obviously it's a bit different now, but from what I understand, like the model is, there's a 700 quid sign up fee, you take 10%, or Just Eat take 10%. But in those early days, what did that really look like? Was it literally you and a clipboard or something, and how much has that changed to today?
Yeah, so it was it was pretty I would say it was, the tools were basic, but they were very effective. So I kind of think it like from an engineering perspective, which is, often the simplest tools are the best tools. So I built a sales presenter with an A4 ring binder, which was laminated and had great data in it. And had 7 slides, which explained what the product was, why you should buy it, and how much it cost, and reinforced the benefits. And so I learned that at Coca-Cola as a sort of 21, 22-year-old graduate trainee of how to sell the product. And I just replicated that, because for me, I was very fortunate at Coke that they invested so heavily in training, commercial training. So, it was I don't know what they're like these days. I think they're still pretty good, but they were a fantastic place to start your career. They probably irrationally invested in training, and so I picked up those tools that I'd learned along the way at Coke, and I used them at Just Eat, and that sales presenter, I probably still got it somewhere actually, and it worked. It just worked, and so I built the sales ratio off the back of it, which is also something I learned at Coke, which is how many visits per day, how many presentations, how many signings. So my ratio was 12 visits, 6 presentations, 1 signing, and then I used that ratio to train people. So I'd take them on the road, show them the sales presenter, I would do a presentation, they would do a presentation, I would do a presentation, they would do a presentation, then I would critique them, and then they would critique me. And then I would literally use that model to train the tens and hundreds in the end of salespeople that we ended up having. And then what I would say to them is, look, here's my ratio, I'd talk them through it, 12, 6, and 1, and I'd challenge them to better it. And of course, the better guys in the team very quickly bettered it. And then I would use the guys that bettered it to train the ones that weren't doing as well. And that was kind of a model that rolled and scaled. It empowered the team to self-develop. It empowered the team to scale in terms of their feedback, and built trust, because I tried to create a culture where, we're genuine. There's no wrong around here. So I'm transparent with my information. So if I'm the CEO running this thing, and you can see everything I do, good and bad, and here's my numbers to back it up, or here's the things I'm working on to try and improve, I use that culture. Then if it applied to me, it applies to everybody. And that transparency of information was something I was very, very proud of, that we built across the world, actually, as our culture. And I think that scaled very well for us, actually. And I think it just comes from my background of, I think nobody's better than the next person around here. We had a very flat culture. There was no real job titles, and certainly nobody gave a monkeys about your job title. It was about how you behaved and who you were as a person in the team. And so we used that as a way to develop a culture around supporting each other, developing each other, but pushing each other to get better all the time. Like, so if your ratio was that last month, how can you do better this month? And really challenging ourselves. And it created a very healthy, I think, league table of performance. So every week the table would go out, That wasn't. And again, when you share information wide like that, you have a responsibility of a leader to make it safe. And I don't make it safe in sort of some woke, silly 2021 way. I mean at the substance level. So what does that mean? It means you're using it to make improvement, and everyone has to trust it that it's making things better. It's not for like, showing the guy who's 22nd or making that person who's 22nd to feel bad about their week, because they're on their own journey and they're running their own race around here. And it's not about that. It's about how can we, if you're 22nd out of 22, how can we get you to 15, which in your long term of your career will make you better at what you do.
Okay.
So that's what we did.
Yeah, it does sound like because you hear about these toxic sales cultures, but that sounds really positive. You talked about that sort of ratio of that 12-6-1, that kind of metric that it became a benchmark for you. What were the other metrics that the company was built around that what were the metrics that you wanted to have land on your desk once a week or every day or once a month?
The thing I cared about most was how many people we were developing through the company through internal promotion. So when I look at the stupidest thing I see companies do is have a constant aspiration about external hires for promotion, because it's expensive, B, it's inefficient, and C, it's highly demotivating the people internally. And actually, D, what it tells you is there's not a very good culture of internal development within the company. So I tried to create a culture in Just Eat where line managers were responsible for creating a conveyor belt of talent. And bear in mind, we were growing very quickly. So we were hiring tens of people a month. In the end, probably there was over 2,500 people in the company. But the thing I was most proud of, Neil, was the fact that if you look across our markets, even to this day, most of the senior leaders, including the executive team, came through internal promotion at Just Eat. And that for me was about two things. One, it's about creating a culture of getting better and developing people and supporting them on their journey. But secondly, and this is the thing I see in a lot of companies when I invest in now, and a lot of companies get this wrong, you have to trust the people internally to make the step up and have a go at the next level. Now, that doesn't mean to say you should just promote internally blindly, because you need to then develop them, because you have a responsibility, if you give people that chance, to then train them properly. But the benefit you get around culture and values and know-how and loyalty is so powerful for companies. And if you look at some of the best companies in the world, I think they have some of the best internal recruitment and training and development programs. And I think it serves companies very well in terms of consistency of performance and culture and value. So that was the thing I probably focused on the most, because I'd always hear, especially from our venture capitalists, you need to get this guy at Harvard MBA, ex-Google. I was like, I can give a monkey's toss about that. I care about, does that matter? Yes. Can I use that for a proxy? Yes. But actually, I'm not 19 anymore where I'm looking at academic qualifications. I'm in a professional environment, and I need to understand what does great look like from a behavior, values, as well as competency perspective, and look at who's trainable and who's developable. Because there's a characteristic that the best people have, I think, which is a value around learning, pushing themselves, being open to learning, being very transparent around their own development. And if you have people like that, they can go such a long way in your organization. I would spend a lot of time and attention around, who was leading people, how were they developing those people, when we had vacancies, how many were being filled internally versus externally, and challenging ourselves. Like, when I hear the line manager say, look, I just don't have anyone in the team who's ready, I say, well, why are they not ready? What have you done? If you're the line manager, why are they not ready? What are you doing to develop them so they are ready? It's lazy leadership to think you've got to go external all the time. Not to say that sometimes it doesn't help to go external, but you've got to get the balance right.
So yeah, it sounds like it was very people first business. And what about the sort of the numbers, the sort of the financial numbers? What were those metrics that you were keeping an eye on day in, day out, in terms of whether that's like number of new stores signed up, whether it was number of meals served? What were those key metrics that for you represented success?
Yeah, but aren't all businesses people businesses? Right?
Well, not some that I've seen, but yeah, they should be. They should be, I think.
Yeah, well, it's, if you look at the biggest failure of FTSE boards, right? Before I answer your question, to answer your question on metrics, all businesses, and this is, I think, the biggest failure of FTSE boards right now, is they look at backward-looking metrics that are outputs.
Mhm.
If you're measuring outputs, right, as a board, all you're really understanding is what's happened into your business the last 6, 12, 18 months. And what you don't understand really is what's caused those outputs. So you look back at the last 12 months of outputs and go, well, we've either done well or we haven't done well. In which case the board either feels great or doesn't feel great. And if it doesn't feel great, it goes, management hasn't done a good enough job. Well, it's like, well, that's just about the most useful and intelligent comment I can imagine a FTSE board can ever make, right? So my question may be, what have they not done great and why? What have you done to understand what's driven that performance? And often if you say that in a FTSE board, first of all, they look at you with two heads. And secondly, they get confused. And the reason why they get confused is the best companies in the world, I think, whether you look at, probably the best one at this is Amazon, they measure inputs. So if you watch Bezos and what he talks about inputs all the time, inputs. Because really the results that companies generate, the balance sheet, the sales numbers, the growth, whatever they are, they're the outputs of the inputs. And so as a leader, as a manager, the only thing you can influence performance-wise is the inputs of your team. So if you're not focused on measuring inputs, so for example, how many calls a day, how many presentations, what's your conversion to those presentations looking like to sales? As an example from a sales funnel, if you take a marketing funnel, how many clicks, how many of those clicks converted? These inputs are the fundamental drivers of the results that you generate, the outputs. But so many businesses just look at the outputs. And so if you look at outputs only, you have no insight as to what's happened over here. So the outputs are like the last 10% or 5% of performance. The first 80, 90% is all this thing called effort and people generate to try and drive, which are the inputs. So one of the things that I was really disciplined around, if you look back at Just Eat, is I measured inputs. So what are people doing around you in each function, having that clearly mapped out? How well are we doing at the inputs? And that's a very uneasy thing for a board, because the board will go, yeah, but we need to know what the revenue is going to be. What's the revenue going to be? Yeah, the revenue is just a function of the outputs. It's just an output of all these different inputs. So yeah, I can have it as a number for you and you can have the number, but so you know, as a CEO, I'm looking at the inputs. So of course I care about the output, but I really am, the only thing I can influence through performance and management and leadership is the inputs that the team put into their job every day. So to answer your question, that's what I focused on. Mm-hmm. So in each market, I would bottom up, sit with the team, you know, and work out what are the inputs around here that are going to drive ultimately the outputs. And I think if you create that level of focus on performance around what people are doing every day in terms of their inputs, you have a much better quality conversation with the people that work for you, like a much better quality conversation, because all of a sudden you're talking about the things that matter to them, the things that influence their performance, the things that really they care about. And as a leader, therefore, you can then empathize and help to drive value, because you can, of course, start to talk about, okay, how can I help you? What are the things you're struggling with? And it opens up just a much better quality conversation.
Interesting. So yeah, and I suppose you're right. I think there's so many businesses can focus on those metrics that they think if they just focus on them, you know, if they build it, they will come. But your point really is that actually you have to focus on the people that are ultimately going to be delivering those final metrics.
Yeah, focus on the activity that they're driving every day. Focus on activity and inputs, and that's why you still see to this day many FTSE companies get nasty surprises. And the boards will go to completely unacceptable management, fire the CEO, change the leadership. And what that really tells you is they don't know what's going on around you, because if they did, nothing would come as a surprise. So I can tell you, nothing ever happened in my 12 years at Just Eat at the end of a year when a result came out that I didn't expect to happen. Because every week and month I was measuring the input. So I could see roughly where we were going to end, plus minus 2 or 3%. And so by measuring inputs, nothing should come as a surprise, because you can see from the activity what's going on around here where it's going to end. So it's a completely different place to be in terms of understanding. But it's honestly, if you think about FTSE boards, and it's one of my bugbears of FTSE boards, as you can probably sense, is I was surprised when I got into a public market environment. You know, I was a pretty young FTSE CEO. I was like 36, 37. I thought I was going to go to this place where I was going to learn loads and loads from these like big city grandees and names that were joining our board. I was so excited to learn and like, how do they do things in the FTSE? And then I realized quite quickly it was pretty pathetic in terms of other than reputation. It was pretty feeble. I think we as a company, we were more sophisticated about how we managed ourselves governance wise, than FTSEs. And therefore, I'm not surprised to this day when FTSE companies still, end up giving nasty surprises to shareholders and stuff like that, because I can see they're sort of stuck in this sort of antiquated way of board governance, which doesn't give proper transparency either to shareholders, investors, and doesn't really properly hold management to account. Because honestly, if you go and ask them, pick a FTSE company that's probably given a nasty surprise to shareholders the last 2-3 years, and go and look at their annual report, and I will bet you literally 20 cents on the dollar that I bet you that they will be measuring outputs. And so, well, of course you haven't got a clue, because you're not even measuring the right stuff.
So then, coming back to that thing you were saying earlier about, you didn't have first mover advantage, but you did believe that you were the best executors. Is it fair to say that you think that your sort of competitive advantage was people around, because you end up acquiring Hungry House, is that right? Who were the ones who were on Dragon's Den or whatever. So was do you feel like that was your competitive advantage? And also, what else did you do to make you the best executor in the market?
Yeah, the good thing was we knew we were the best executors because we were measuring the inputs. We could see that we were. But we that was our culture. So yeah, it was the people, right? So I think our culture was the competitive differentiator that we created. We had a very strong culture that we felt really proud of, but also very protective about, and we thought it was the key differentiating factor from a competitive perspective. We were very driven. So yeah, for sure, I think it was the people ultimately, but it was the culture that we built around the people. And if you look at probably the statistic I was most proud of, actually, other than the number of internal promotions we had, was probably our churn. So if you looked at Just Eat's as a global business, our staff retention statistics were definitely best in class, and we know because obviously we measure them versus our peer groups, and I think that caused us a lot of and created a lot of efficiency internally, because we didn't have the pain of losing talent and having to retrain and hire talent, because the best people stayed, and we put a lot of effort into making that not just our culture but also our reward packages. So everybody in Just Eat had shares in the company, everybody. So even the part-time cleaner in office in our call center in North London also had options in the company. So everybody in Just Eat, when the company went public, everybody to some extent benefited from that. And I think that concept of ownership, I always used to talk about Just Eat internally, and I always talked about everybody as a founder. So I used to say, we're a company built by thousands of founders. And if you think about the energy of founders and how much passion and care and drive they have to build a company, well, imagine building a culture where you literally have a culture of thousands of founders who all feel like they're owners in this business, and then harnessing that and pushing something forward. To me, then, I can see when I look back at it now why Just Eat was able to go on and become a reasonable company, was because we created this concept that we talked about a lot internally of thousands of founders. And I think that was a very important driving force in our behavior and also our culture.
Brilliant. And so that obviously it helps us understand about your sort of very strong growth. But what were your concerns and your attitudes and fundamentally your actions about 5-6 years ago around when there started to be these sort of now major players, Deliveroo and Uber Eats, come into the market very visibly? I remember I was living in London the beginning of basically 5 years ago, beginning of 2016, and that may even been when we first met. But it was very palpable that Deliveroo and Just Eat were really making strong moves. And I don't think they were even in Cardiff at that point. But yeah, what were you feeling at that point, and how did you plan to address that, because they were such a potential threat?
Yeah, I think if I look back on that sort of probably 2015 to 2021, now where we're at, I mean, that was sort of 10 years into Just Eat, really, and we'd always had competition, so there was nothing new there. But it was very obvious after we went public in April 2014. It was very obvious that sort of the sort of global financial investor world had woken up to the fact that food tech, as it was then called. I knew we had a problem when it was called food tech. I knew it'd become fashionable at that point, because up until then we were this grotty takeaway startup and nobody knew where to put us. And all of a sudden we were called food tech. I knew there was an issue. But what happened was then literally hundreds of millions of investor dollars poured into the sector. Literally, I mean, if you think about London alone, probably more than $1 billion of investment, more than $1 billion, has gone into London's food delivery startups in the last 5 years. Just London. If you think about the UK, it'll be more than $1 billion, well more than $1 billion. So yeah, that of course changed the landscape. But what was incredible through that period was, and what I realized quite quickly, is that, look, I come from the Coca-Cola background, and as you can sense, I drew on that a lot. Coke has Pepsi, Tesco has Sainsbury's. When you build an industry, you're always going to have competition, and in an industry as big as food delivery, which is maybe not the weapons industry, but it's a pretty big global industry. You're never going to have the market to yourself. That's if you go into that as a thesis as an entrepreneur, then you're flawed from the get-go. So I always kind of had a relatively mature attitude around competition. As long as we were doing the best we could do with the best people that we had, of course we were going to end up sharing this industry with 2 or 3, maybe 4 different players. And that's kind of pretty much how it started. We had Hungry House and Urban Bite. And then along the way, we obviously either bought, acquired, or beat them. But then along the journey, other startups, whether it was Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Takeaway.com in Europe, there's always going to be, because the industry is just a big industry. And if you look at the reality, Neil, then it's probably good for the consumer that there's 2 or 3 different options. It's definitely good for the restaurants because it keeps those suppliers honest in terms of commission rates. So I'd say it's probably something we should all just come to expect now. And the reality, if you look at the numbers, all these businesses, probably the exception of Uber Eats, which has struggled, all these businesses are doing pretty well. So it's not like it's not a 1 and a 0 here. This is a big market with a big growth trajectory as more and more of us buy more and more items online in food. And the more we buy, and if you think about your own behaviors, all of us now are buying more and more food and more delivery. Mm-hmm. And it's not just because of COVID, we're all doing it anyway. COVID just accelerated it. So to me, it's, Just Eat, as still the clear market leader now. And I think, will it have competition in the next 5-10 years? For sure. But I mean, that to me, that's just become a normal thing in a maturing industry.
Well, that's it. And I suppose all these food startups are just, I see a lot of them. And I suppose a bunch of them will get hoovered up by Rocket Internet, and some of them won't. But yeah, that's it's going to be a very interesting to see how people sort of.
Rocket Internet's still alive. I don't know. Are they?
Who knows? I've been scared to look at what they've been up to recently. They're always interesting to read about. So listen, we're coming to the end of this. We've kind of already over time anyway. We've been chatting for so long. If anyone has any questions, quickly bung them in the chat box for David, and I'll communicate them. We've talked very briefly there about sort of the future for food. I just want to finish with, there's so much more I have on my notes to ask you, but we're not going to get through a fraction of it. You are now a venture capitalist with 83 North. Where are you investing right now, and what are the interesting trends that are attractive to you that you think the next 5-10 years are going to be built on?
Yeah, so I other than Welsh rugby, I spend my time sort of looking at global tech companies now. So I probably 2 things, Neil. No surprise, I invest in food technology companies globally. So I've got one in the US, one in Latin America, pretty much Brazil, really. They have aspirations outside of Brazil, and then I look at early stage tech companies that are related to marketplace business models. So it could be payment platform, could be a supplier of software to independent restaurants. So I'm kind of fishing in I think a growing pool of global food technology delivery, which I think I got a decent understanding of, as well as investing globally in sort of food technology companies. So yeah, that's kind of how I spend my time. I really enjoy it. I love working with entrepreneurs. I like building things. They're kind of the 2 reasons why I kind of involved in. I kind of stick to what I know just because I feel like that's where I can add value and help. So yeah, predominantly looking at that. I'm actually in the process of thinking about actually doing my own fund. I'm not sure yet. I'm sort of exploring it as an option, just because it's quite nice to do things on your own sometimes. I think as an entrepreneur, I love building teams, but when you work in a sort of venture firm, clearly there's all the dynamics of a partnership, etc. So we'll see. I mean, I'm definitely happy as I am, but I'm definitely considering maybe doing my own sort of I guess food technology type fund. Let's see. I'm sort of exploring it. That's kind of what I'm up to professionally outside of Welsh rugby.
Okay.
Although Welsh rugby takes up more time than I thought it might.
Yeah, well, funny that. So maybe we've got some quick fire responses from you here, just be with one eye on the time. So we have some questions. Maybe try and get these down to 15, 30 seconds per response, and we'll whiz through these. So please explain the process of going for an IPO and why.
How long have I got?
Give me 30 seconds. Well, I'll let you know.
So process of IPO, why we did it, we wanted to access global capital from big investors to go and acquire businesses in our sector, to buy businesses. And there was the most efficient way to raise capital. So that was the reason why. The process is, it takes about a year. It's probably one of the most intense periods of my life. So it culminates in what's called a roadshow, where you literally spend 2-3 weeks doing 16, 17 hours a day meeting with investors to hopefully buy shares in your company, going traveling, you're literally across the world it was insane. So it's kind of like a world tour of investors, but it's a year in the making in terms of preparing your company financially, etc., etc.
Brilliant. Okay, and Malcolm has asked, which decision did you learn the most from and why?
I learned the most from when I left and resigned as a CEO after 12 months, because after 12 years, sorry, and I've learned the most then because you definitely learn who your real friends are, because all of a sudden you go from being surrounded by people who laugh at your jokes because you're a CEO to the people that really are the people you can trust. So yeah, probably I learned the most actually when I resigned about also learned a bit about myself, but definitely learned about people and who are the people to really value and trust. That's for sure.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, you've said before, and I think you're fairly open about this. That transition from being a CEO to a VC was not a totally easy one, right? It's you define yourself by your company, and leaving something that you've built is not an easy one.
No, it's not, Neil, because if you think about it, for me, I started Just Eat when I was 28, 29. When I left, I was 41. I'd spent all my 30s building the company, and spent, I don't know, an insane amount. I think I had 2 holidays in 12 years, which gives you a rough idea, and maybe a bit of color. So yeah, and all of a sudden when you leave, my dad actually said the most important thing. My dad said, listen, son, in the end, companies never love you back. Investors don't love you back. And it was kind of like spoken from the words of a cynical, scientist that my dad is. And I think to some extent where he was right, though, is the people that were always your friend and always good. You always mattered them, irrespective of whether you had ups, downs, successes or failures. Those are the ones in the end that stay with you. So it's important along the way, I think, as an entrepreneur, to remember that, not get carried away with with some of the adulation that comes your way as things go well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So Richard's asked, once you got the supply side user on board, how did you communicate with them to get feedback and keep them on the platform? So I suppose that's about user engagement, really, isn't it? If I'm not misreading that.
Yeah, so we would send a weekly newsletter to them. In the early years, in the early months, I would personally call them once a week if they hadn't had an order. So if I could see they hadn't had any business from us, I would actually personally call them, just to give them an update, see how they were going, just to remind them that, how things were, and that we had a good relationship, that we cared long term about them, that it just wasn't one about the short term. So that was one of the mechanisms. So I had a back end system that would tell me if they'd not received an order for 7 days. If anybody's an order for 7 days, I would personally call them. And then we would send a newsletter out to all our restaurant owners to update them that I personally wrote, that would be sent to all the owners on a weekly basis to let them know how business was going, what we were investing in, how much we'd grown by, what do they expect to see from us next. They were kind of the two main mechanisms I would use. So it's all about in the early months and years of a relationship, over communicate, under promise, over deliver. And that's what and to give you, I would always say to our restaurants, look, it's going to take 6-12 months for you to start to get regular orders from us. Now, orders would come much quicker than that. But the fact that positioned in their head, it's going to take 6 to 12 months. A, it reminded them it's a long-term relationships. And B, it meant that they didn't get impatient when they turned the box on and no orders came for the first few weeks. Because it takes time, right, to build the demand side.
Sure. Matthew is asking, one piece of advice for a startup in the order stroke delivery market now?
I would say have a look at how you can differentiate. What does that mean? I think if you can get your delivery times down to 15, 20 minutes, then I think you have an interesting proposition. If you're delivering food within 45 to 30 minutes, I don't think that's disruptive enough. I think consumers are getting very demanding around the delivery time. So I'd have a close look. There's a great company called Getir in Turkey, which I think right now is the most disruptive, interesting company in the global food delivery space, and they're delivering everything within 15 minutes. Think about how challenging that is.
Yeah, logistically, yes, that's a hell of a. And Matthew has said because they're all Dragons fans, he wants you to invest. So there we go.
What? Because what?
They're all Dragons fans, so he's looking for investment, and he just dropped in there casually that they're all Dragons fans. So Nathan has asked, how did you prioritize opportunities? I imagine there were times when you saw opportunity everywhere.
Yeah, I would always go back to first principles. To me, that means what is the core reason that we're in business, and if it was in or around the core, I would seriously consider prioritizing it. If it was outside of the core reason of what we do every day, then I would deprioritize it. I think the best businesses do one or two things extraordinarily well. Yeah. And that earns you the right then to maybe slowly prioritize and go out. But I think the worst companies end up trying to do 4, 5, 6, 7 different things, and I just don't think history tells us that that's a very successful way to grow a business.
No, there's a really good mantra that I heard once, says one customer, one problem, one revenue stream. Just, and I think if you look at like all the massive companies, they all did that. Amazon just sold books to begin with. Uber just did A to B transport for millennials in the Bay Area. They just really hyper focus on solving one problem before slowly spreading their wings a little bit. So yeah, definitely feels that's true. You've already spoken about shares for everybody in the business, but did you incentivize your staff in any other ways in terms of like sign-ups and what were their hitting targets?
Yeah, so there was the long-term incentive, which was everyone had shares in the company, and they could have been worth nothing, or they could have ended up being worth something. So everyone behaved like a founder around that by taking that leap of faith. But yeah, in terms of yearly incentives, so yeah, we had an annual bonus. If you're in the sales team, it was your package, your compensation was 60% basic salary, 40% on target incentivized earnings. So yeah, and everyone had, everyone shared in the company bonus annual scheme. So we did have a sort of annual bonus scheme as well as the long-term incentive plan, but that was obviously predicated on the company's performance.
Okay, and now we're down two very last quick questions. Louis wants to know, what do you think the future is for on-demand ordering stroke delivery in terms of changes in technology? And he says, P.S. big up Cumbraen.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, so I grew up in Ponywood in Cumbraen. It was actually Hayley Parsons and I grew up on the same street. She was
no way.
Yeah, she was a year or two up in school, but her brother was in my class, Jamie Parsons. Yeah, so we grew up. I think she was at number 81 T-Box, and I was 15 T-Box Road in Ponywood. Yeah, we literally grew up on the same road.
There's going to be some weird stat about entrepreneurial success by postcode, right? And that's going to be the most entrepreneurial postcode in Wales.
MP44 1LN. There you go.
There we go. Right, we're all moving there next week, right, folks?
So I think the biggest thing you're going to see is in on demand is like I just alluded to. So speed of delivery is going to be very disruptive. Have a look at Turkey. There's a big market leader there, which is like the Just Eat, called Yemek Sepeti. But the number 2 player growing quickly, there's Getir business. They've had a lot of investment. from global investment, but they're growing very quick. And how they've disrupted is this 15, 20-minute delivery time.
And is that because of the density? Are they in Istanbul? Are they able to do that because of density?
Exactly right, Neil. So it's partly driven by density, and it's definitely driven by the efficiency of their product technology stack, which has enabled them to allocate orders to delivery drivers much quicker, far more efficiently, which delivers quicker to the end user, as well as using artificial intelligence to predict. And this is what's super interesting if you think about it. Predict when we're going to be hungry as consumers. Now, that sounds like a fanciful aspiration, but think about it. All of us behave around food very predictably. We often eat at the same time of day. When you order a takeaway, I bet everyone on this call orders it roughly on the same night of the week that they normally order on. They probably choose the same restaurant. They probably choose the same food off the restaurant menus that they order from, even though they bother to look at the menu. They still choose the same thing they ordered last week. So if you think about predictability in food, it actually does exist. So developing artificial intelligence, which can predict as consumers what David Buttress fancies to eat from his local Thai restaurant on Thursday, enables that platform to then tell the kitchen, look, we start preparing the food. So I'll give you an example. iFood in Brazil is actually doing that. So they will tell its local pizza restaurants, make 15 margarita pizzas for 5:30 p.m. We know we're going to get at least that amount of orders for you on margarita pizzas. So bang them in the oven at 20 past 5. So as soon as the demand starts flying in at 5:30, instead of the customer having to wait until 6:10 to get the delivery, they can now get it at 5:55. So it short circuits the supply side. So it's quite an interesting exploration. It's very early, but I'm definitely curious about that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and in some respects, it's not the technology is the innovative bit, but you know, they were the national grid were adding extra supply for, you know, back in the 50s for the FA Cup final at half time, right? They knew that was a very predictable signal, a very predictable proxy of when everyone was going to go and bung the kettle on, right? So, you know, an inevitable extension of that. Right, so one very final fun question. This weekend, what's your predictions?
Yeah, I think Wales will win. I think we'll win. I think if you look at our conversion rates around Grand Slams, I think we've got the best record out of all the 6 teams in the tournament. You know, we very rarely don't convert on the last weekend. I think it's tricky for us. I think it's without question, it's probably the hardest Grand Slam conversion we've had. France in Paris, and this is the second best team in the tournament. Notice I said second best team in the tournament.
England first, yeah, obviously.
So I think it'll be tight, but I think we'll win. I think the players have done a fabulous job, by the way. I think, you know, what makes me smile is every year Wales are underestimated. Every year in the media, by our opponents, every year we're underestimated. It makes me smile every year. We've won more Grand Slams than anyone in the last 20 years, and yet you will read every year go, Wales are going to finish 4th. Wales are going to finish 5th. Wales are going. It's like, do these people? I mean, where is the bias, right? How stupid are these people? They don't look at history. They don't look at evidence. They don't look at anything. So there's always a little bit of a up yours in my mind about the Six Nations, because I think we more than any other nation in the last sort of 15 years have consistently performed at a high level. So I'm just delighted for the players because they've done it once again, haven't been written off, I think, unfairly. It was always going to be difficult after Gatland, and I think the guys have done a fabulous job. And I will say one shout out, because it doesn't happen often enough, and that's to the 4 professional regions. Because let's be clear around here, right? Without the 4 professional regions, the last year in particular, standing behind the COVID debt, because nobody else did in Welsh rugby, the 4 regions had to, we wouldn't have professional rugby still in its current format in Wales. So I hope we win this weekend, and I hope it's recognised how much the 4 professional regions are not just put into developing the players, but also literally taking on £20 million worth of COVID debt this year to keep the professional game afloat, because that's sitting not at the hands of the Welsh Rugby Union, but that's sitting at the door of the people involved in those 4 regions. So I think, you know, won't be commonly understood or known, but I definitely think this weekend, you know, everyone in those 4 regions and the supporters of those 4 regions should have a glass of wine if wherever we finish in this tournament, and think to themselves, the support of the regions, and the regions themselves have done a really good job the last 12 months. Because as you can imagine, it's certainly in my professional experience been the most difficult 12 months I've ever experienced in terms of how you keep managing through a period of literally all your revenue taps are turned off, And oh, by the way, the funding for the professional game was also withdrawn. So it's fingers crossed for a great weekend.
Yeah,
we're going to win by 4 points.
Well, as an Englishman, a devout English rugby fan, I'm constantly telling my friends back in England not to underestimate Wales. So you've got one supporter. Just don't let Reece Zammit get injured, because I need him for Gloucester to save our season, please.
I'll tell you one funny story before I go, right? So my son goes to school in England, and after we beat England by 16 points.
No need to remind me.
16 points, just to remind you. My son went to school on the Monday, and a couple of his mates said to him, "Oh, you were lucky, this, and this." So I knew he was going to get it. So I just say to him, it was 16 points. You got annihilated by 16 points. How can you even think about one try, this, that, and the other? So my son came home and said to me, "Dad, I said to them they got annihilated. They lost by 16 points. No point." I said to him, "Tell them they can have the knock-on try back," and we still beat them by 9 points. And so he said, "I said, oh, who did you say it to?" I think it was one of his mates, Charlie, who's his best mate, who's a big England rugby fan. He said, "Mr. Towers, my teacher." I was like, "Oh, fuck you." I was like, "You said it to your teacher?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, well done, son." And I saw the teacher, and I said to him, I said, "Did he actually say that to you?" He said, "Yeah." And he was dancing around the classroom at the time, going like this. But I said to him, when you're a Welsh kid in an English school, I said, "You've got to give him that after they've beaten you lot."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone's taken lots away from that, and that's been incredibly useful. So thank you. And hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, folks.
Yeah. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, David. Take care. Bye-bye.